she's at the same firm that I'm at, CBRE in San Jose, and I've known Young for going on, I think, maybe 22 years in the business. We've worked with each other, partnered in the business together, and she introduced me to Diane, and that's been a wonderful introduction, so thank you. I do want to give one shout out to Wendy Stone. Wendy is the X factor, and I'm very serious when I say that. One of the most critical components of a data center is the power. She went through and eloquently outlined some of the background, which I'll put some more meat on the bone for you. But what SVP does is nothing short of astonishing. So Wendy, amazing. Really, your team is amazing. So thank you. A little bit of background on me, and then we'll talk a bit about the demand, what's driving demand for data centers. And then we'll give you an overview of the data center market locally here in Santa Clara and how specifically data centers are impacting commercial real estate in the business community. That's our goal today. I've got about 50 slides. We could spend all afternoon here, and I'm going to power through this thing. We'll probably skip some slides. If there's a question, throw it at me. I studied engineering in college, and we were very hands-on applications. We got down and dirty with lab coats, and that's how I learned. So that's how I present. The quick background, and thank you, Doc, for that intro. That was a great intro. I did study engineering in college. My first job out of school, I was an application engineer. And I took those skills and talents and then applied them to finance and real estate and found myself at CB. That was going on 24 years ago, I joined CB. And how we started the data center practice was interesting because in 1996, our government deregulated the telecommunication business with the Telecom Act of 1996. We may all remember that. The internet was taking off. We needed real solid competition in the marketplace to really grow the piece of the business. So I had just joined CB, and we were getting these really unique requirements coming through the office where they were CLECs, competitive local exchange carriers that were coming into the market to compete with the incumbent carrier, which at the time was PacBell. And we said to ourselves, a couple partners that I worked with, we said, there's an opportunity here to help these folks, and that's where we started the CBRE data center practice. It's the oldest running, I actually co-founded it, it's the oldest running data center practice in the US. I was just telling a story to one of the colleagues here that we started it in the 97 as the market was just taking off. And then what's differentiated our practice from the others is that when the market crashed, and we all felt it here, I mean, we really felt it in the Silicon Valley. When that market crashed in 01, in our office, you could hear a pin drop. It was quiet. And our first daughter was just born, and I got to say, it was scary because I was saying to myself, how am I going to make a living to pay for this kid's diapers and food, and how am I going to do it? But we actually did it, and we kept the practice running, and we've been very, very lucky, very, very fortunate to grow this practice into what it is today, which is one of the premier data center advisory practices. Physically, I live with my family in Menlo Park. Our office is downtown San Jose, and Santa Clara is where I spend a lot of my time with our clients. So that's a little bit about me. How I want to start this presentation off is that I think we can all agree the world is changing. It's changing very rapidly, and it's manifesting itself in many different ways. One of them is we're creating data. We're creating tons of data. And SVP has got to figure out how to power the facilities that store all that data. I'm in the middle of reading this book right now, which I don't know if any of you have read it. If you haven't, I would recommend that you pick it up if you're into technology and kind of the future of tech. Dr. Kai-Fung Lee is a PhD from Carnegie Mellon, which is one of the premier artificial intelligence and data research institutions in our country. And this gentleman picked up his PhD at Carnegie. went to work for Microsoft as a data scientist, and then wound up running Google's business in China. He's now splintered off and started his own venture capital firm, is investing in startups in China. He talks about, in this book, he talks about the age of data. He says that's what we're in right now. We're in this amazing age of data. And he's making these bold predictions. We've all heard them, that supposedly artificial intelligence is going to eliminate half the workforce in the next 15 to 20 years. Scary. I mean, there's change out there. But I think what was interesting that I've read in this book is that he talks about how data, which powers AI, he's saying that AI is the electricity of our economy, and the data is the oil, if you will, the fuel of it. I think we really need to think about that. It's a very interesting read, but it's the basis of our presentation. I'm told that Diana knows the doc, and she's going to get an intro with him. I can't wait to meet him. So let's power through this. This is just a quick slide on our platform, our firm. The takeaway here is we're helping our clients from inception through developing a business case, developing a strategy, to going to market, to executing a transaction. It could be a lease, it could be a purchase, it could be a build-to-suit. And once that facility is built, managing it, running it. And I've met some interesting people in this audience. We've got a data center engineer who was at Cisco. Now she's at Ericsson. We've got a doc from the Bronx. We've got SVP here. We've got a soccer guy. I've met, Love Payments. There's some cool names, cool people. So it's a very diverse group. But when we help, these folks, move into businesses, they've got to run them. They've got to run these businesses. So we've got a team that's set up to run the operation and move the operation. We are involved in the physical layer, the real estate level, which would essentially be that top layer. And then we're also involved in the infrastructure layer, which would be all this, the storage, the compute, the network, moving and migrating all of that piece of the business. So that's what we do. This is just a snapshot of my resume locally here in the Valley, just to put a little, color commentary. This is the city of Santa Clara. Over my career, my team has been involved in essentially 100 transactions, separate transactions, lease and sale here in primarily most of them in Santa Clara. It's about 5.6 million square feet, 420 megawatts of transactions. And I think, Wendy, you were talking about SVP. Your capacity today is about 700 megawatts.
What our system capacity is currently.
So we've helped structure deals for about half of their capacity. We're proud of that. I am not going to get into this slide. I'm an engineer, and I love definition. And these are a bunch of definitions that actually came from Cisco. And I thought maybe Cisco could come up here and help us define what is a data center, define what goes into a data center, what's the value proposition of the data center. I'm not going to get into the detail here, but high level, a data center's value proposition is that it's a mission-critical facility that's always going to operate. If there's an earthquake, a natural disaster, some sort of an event, the technology that physically sits in that facility will always be running. That's the value. It's a physical structure, poured in place concrete and steel and strong and secure. And then inside that facility, you've got electrical systems and cooling systems, space power cooling to manage the technology that sits within those four walls and roof. There is an industry standard. There's a tiering system. There's actually an institute that's put together a series of what they call just definition, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. And they essentially define the redundancy of these engineered facilities. How many of you have been in a data center? Just quick show of hands. Half the audience. Okay, so a little bit of review. But for those of you that haven't, this is what we're talking about. That's tech space, white space, conditioned data floor. I've got a photo of a data center that I was in. It's an old one. You can see my foot basically just fits right, kind of right on the floor. Like, a foot. I think that raised floor is maybe a foot high. In a modern data center today, it's typically about 3 feet high. And they're moving air volume through that floor to cool the technology. Just to give you a sense of what it costs a foot to build something like this, you're roughly $100 million for a 100,000 square foot facility. So it's real material cash to build a shell and then deliver that technology space that's at the conditions, space, power, cooling. What's even more impressive is the technology that gets layered into, which is this center photo. It's kind of cool because it shows all the compute, all that's sitting in there. And oftentimes that can be 2 or 3x the cost of the facility. So these facilities are significant capital investments. So the world is changing. And these are my kids. That's our oldest daughter is a golfer. I just played a quick video of her golf swing for you. The world is changing. We talked about it. Doc here is saying it's changing. I think we're all feeling it. We all know it's changing. And this change is fundamentally changing how data centers and the footprint of data centers are used. I just took a couple photos so you could get a sense of, my wife and I are very proud of our children. We've got a senior in high school, the older one, and the younger one's an 8th grader. The world's changed for me is every day I come home, you can see in this lower left-hand corner, a pile of boxes at the house. And all of that's been enabled through this data center network that we're going to discuss. We're all going through that. I had heard something on the TV the other day that on this past Monday that there were close to $10 billion of online retail transactions in one day. So the world is changing. My wife won't go to the store. I don't go to the store. I think probably we're all in the same boat. Our older daughter, the golfer, the photo on the right is a picture of her that we took about a month and a half ago. She just committed to play golf at WashU, Washington University in St. Louis. Really good. They've got a great engineering school, a great medical school. She thinks she wants to become an economist and go to the business school. She's actually been accepted there. But why I put this up here is that video, the app is called Coach Now. And so her golf coach at university wants her every week to download videos of her golf swing, long game, short game, iron game, putting game, journaling her thoughts and feelings when she competes. All that's done through that app. And I often think about, when we all got our first iPhone 10 years ago, there were a couple hundred apps. Now there's over 2 million apps in the market space. Again, creating demand, organic demand for data center facilities. Our younger daughter, the 8th grader, is a crewer, and that's a photo of her crewing in Redwood Shores. She's got an app. Everyone's got an app. So the actual act of crewing is called erging. I'd never heard of erg before, but every week she's got to fill out what's called erg data. It's an app she's got on the phone. Her coach wants to see that she's practicing, she's committed to the sport. The kid's in 8th grade. But those, in my world, are, I played soccer growing up. My coach, there was no app I was, entering. I was having to enter that I practiced. So the world is changing, but more importantly, I think the psychology of this generation is changing. This is a photo that was taken a couple months ago at Oracle Arena, where the Warriors formerly played basketball. This photo was taken by a young man in Young and Mai's office. His name's Chris Letterman. He's our IT expert. So he makes everything seamless in our office, the computing and telephones and the cloud storage. Chris is a gamer. He's in his early 30s. And when he was in his teens, he was a professional gamer. He'd go to competitions and compete. I never knew this existed. So he took this photo a couple of months ago, and they were competing on League of Legends, which is evidently a really popular game. There are 5 people per team. The winner splits $1 million. So gaming is very real, very powerful. They have a global audience, so they had a live audience. Let's go see these people game in person. But then they broadcast it globally through a company called Twitch. It's got a data center right here in Santa Clara, and they're broadcasting that to literally millions of fans globally. All of that experience takes compute, which is what we're doing here in the Valley. So we're going to talk about demographics. Quick snapshot of some millennials at our company. What's the one theme? They're all connected. They demand that they have to be connected. All of this requires robust, strong connectivity and data continuity. You know, like I think we've all said it, the demographics are shaping demand. I had a venture capital, a friend of mine who's in a VC, and he was explaining to me the other day, he said, Jer, I heard a statistic that he and I are both Gen Xers. We were both born in 1969, so we're at the tail end of it, the beginning end of it. He said, on average, a Gen Xer has somewhere around 1,000 photos online, somewhere online. He said that the millennial generation has somewhere on the average of 1 million photos online or videos online. He said, and then the Gen Z, which our kids are, have an average of, at this age, they have an average of 10 million photos. So it's really a population. Every day, both my daughters get up and they've got, they call them streaks. And so a streak, there's an app called Snapchat. And they have a community that they're connected to, and that they need to take a photo every day of themselves that gets distributed to this group of friends. And they have to keep the streak alive. This generation demands it, and so what we see is that we're going to continue to have demand. That's really what's driving this data center business, is a transformation in how we use technology. I've got 2 nephews and a niece, all under the age of 5, and they have an iPad that's just part of their repertoire. And they're streaming games, they're streaming Netflix. The demands are going to just increase. So that's kind of what we're seeing, I think, in society. This slide is just a very quick snapshot of what are we seeing from an enterprise standpoint. And Cohen is a buy-side analyst. They're on Wall Street, and these guys are basically deploying capital, investing. They're chasing yield. They're really chasing yield. The group that provided this research is a group that's focused specifically on the data center and communications platforms. They put a survey out, and they were essentially just saying, hey, you know, typical enterprises, what percentage of your workload is on-prem today, and what's it going to be like in 3 years going forward? And so last year, 47% of all enterprises had their data center footprint, some portion of it on-premise. This year, when they redid that survey, it went down to 42%, went down by 5%, again, getting pushed to the cloud, getting pushed to off-site data centers. They've asked and surveyed, what's that going to look like going into 2023, and they think that number will go down to 30%, 32%. So there's clearly a trend. This is not a new trend. This is a trend that's been, you know, emerging and growing over the years, but it will continue. They also asked, you know, of this group, what percentage of you will look to move data centers off-site in the next year? And 22% said that they had plans to execute a transaction. And so there's major movement in this market space that's creating the demand, that will continue to create the demand for this data center market. What's this? This is a photo of our CB office. And, you know, a traditional real estate firm. When I got into business 24 years ago, lots of file cabinets, a lot of paper. And Young, was it 3 years ago? We went to what we call 360. It's an agile environment where in our office, which is located downtown San Jose, no one has a private office. No one has a private desk. You hotel. You literally come in, you plug your technology. I plug my laptop in. I've got a couple of screens. We've done deals with Dropbox and other cloud providers. We've shifted our entire business to the cloud. It's a cloud-first strategy. CB is a real estate firm. We're not a tech firm, but you know the market is shifting when we've embraced that platform. Yes?
What's
It is. It absolutely is. Yeah, so a cloud is simply a way to harness technology where you're not buying that CapEx, you're leveraging another operator's investment in that infrastructure, and you're paying a fee to them for those compute services. Or a data center, I would say, can provide cloud services, but you've got to be able to manage that infrastructure to provide that service. Does that help? I think when we dig in, we'll get there. This is a slide. Equinix is a client of mine, and they're the largest retailer in the country. And one of their executives gave a presentation last year where he was just announcing statistics, and there were a couple of them that I just wanted to refresh for you, just to put some meat on the bone again, the magnitude of what we're talking about. You know, in terms of this digital transformation, what's the spend? And they budgeted about $1.3 trillion are going to be spent last year, and we're going to do a bit more this year in that CB strategy, that cloud-first strategy. They think by 2023 that spend will be $2.3 trillion, so huge amounts of commitment to this space. The other point I wanted to bring up was the business of the Internet of Things, IoT. We're all experiencing or probably leveraging IoT. It's about $1 billion spend last year. It's going to be 1.7 this year, so significant increase. Two more statistics. Active social media users. Last year there were 2.8 billion. They think by the end of this year there will be 3.4 billion active social media users. Connected devices to the internet. In 2018, there were 8.4 billion. They think by the end of this year, there will be 14 billion connected devices to the internet. So that's really, and we know this, but it's momentum that's going to continue. So who are the players that are supplying this demand? You're looking at them. We call them the hyperscalers. That's really the demand side of the business. They're organizing the marketplace for our businesses. Are those people doing it on their own? Are they building their own data centers to provide these services? Are they going to market and leasing and leveraging other folks' balance sheets to do it? Generally, engineers tend to be control freaks, and they tend to want to do it themselves, and these are all engineering-based companies. The first couple, I would say the first three, really, if they can, they've got tremendous teams, engineering teams that they've built to go secure a site, negotiate a deal, negotiate incentives, put together a transaction, build the facility, and operate, tie it together. That's generally what you see with the larger firms. Then the others are leveraging others' balance sheets. So when we say they're leveraging others, who's in this piece of the business? And this is a slide that outlines by megawatt who the suppliers of data centers are. It's a pretty cool slide. You can see Digital Realty, Equinix, NTT Communications. Digital Realty is a San Francisco-based REIT, real estate investment trust, and they were in inception. They started their business after the tech wreck of 2001. They went out buying distressed data centers. They felt there was fundamentally a solid business case, even though the market had crashed. They liked that space and they started investing. And they flipped their business from being an investor actually to a developer. They're the largest in Santa Clara. As I understand it, the largest consumer of utility power in the city of Santa Clara is Digital Realty. They've got close to 3 million square feet, spread out about 25 buildings in the city of Santa Clara. This is a slide that just validates that these data center folks are doing something right. What is on the graph in front of you is just simply a return on investment going back 5 years to 2015. And all they simply do is they're taking two indexes, a communication infrastructure index and a data center index. The difference between the two are the communication index has got like cell tower companies, Crown Castle is an example, that are part of that index. But I was blown away when I looked at the returns that these folks were achieving over a 5-year run are astonishing, especially when you benchmark it against the Dow, against NASDAQ, against Coca-Cola, against Microsoft. These returns are really, really impressive. These folks have cash, they have capital, and they're executing in the market. So let's shift gears a little bit. We're going to segue out of, what the demand of the business, who's supplying the business, and let's talk a little bit about what's the actual data center footprint in the US. And we can do this for you globally, but we thought, hey, for today's conversation, let's keep it to North America. Let's just talk about North America, and then let's bring it home and talk about the Silicon Valley. So this is just simply a chart outlining 7 major markets in the US, and then another 8 secondary markets. And we're measuring the markets by wholesale, not retail, but wholesale offerings. A wholesale offering is, if you think about a rent, like a gross rent. When you, let's say Diana, who owns the building, she decides to move the business and find a new tenant for this facility. And she charges them a rent that includes the real estate cost, plus taxes, insurance, maintenance, excluding utilities. But everything else is wrapped into that rent. That's a gross rent. That's essentially what these folks are doing for the marketplace. So they're building these data centers, turnkey, offering on a gross basis net of electric. That's what we're measuring in the statistics. I just want to quickly point out the largest data center market in the US is in Northern Virginia, as it probably should be, right by the government. They're storing more of the records than anyone else in the world. 860 megawatts of built capacity. So if you just think about the math behind what's been built in Northern Virginia, it's quite astronomical. If you compare and contrast that to Silicon Valley, we're at 255. We think by this year we'll be getting close to 300 with the construction that's underway. So the magnitude is pretty significant. We're the 3rd largest market in the country. So let's bring it home. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. Got a bunch of logos in front of you. We all live in the community, and we're excited to be part of the community. It's a dynamic marketplace. So the Silicon Valley, people always ask, well, why is it such a big data center market? It's really a data center market by default. It's very expensive to do business here, high cost of living, high cost of land, a lot of regulation, expensive power on a relative basis across the country, earthquakes, fault, flood. So from a data center site selection standpoint, you start to add up all these issues you've got to overcome, but we've overcome them. And it's an exciting place to be doing business, but really it is a data center market by default. You wouldn't see an investment bank from New York who's got to comply to Sarbanes-Oxley. You wouldn't see them put their secondary disaster recovery data center here in the Silicon Valley. That doesn't happen. Okay, so let's keep bringing this conversation back to our market here on a very micro basis. So this slide I have in front of you, I just wanted to define what is the data center market? What the heck is it? So at CB, we define the Silicon Valley, basically it's Santa Clara County, Palo Alto, south to San Jose, back up to Fremont is actually Alameda County, but that's how we define the Silicon Valley. 800,000 square acres of land, it's huge. It's a huge market. There's 350 million square feet of commercial buildings, 350 million square feet, 100 million of industrial, and then the balance is R&D and office. The data center market, there's roughly 7 million square feet of data centers in this market. So it's about 2% of the market space. There's roughly 80 data center buildings in the valley, and you're looking at them. And Wendy mentioned, hey, city of Santa Clara, we have 50 of them. Why are there 50 data centers in the city of Santa Clara? And I think the answer is the X factor. It truly is. Just a couple of takeaways in terms of how we define this market, because you're going to hear some terms, and Doc, you brought up one, like what data center cloud. So the way we define the data center market, high level, is you have retail services, you have retail co-location, you have wholesale co-location, you have enterprise, and you have carrier hotels. Those are kind of the 4 food groups we've defined to separate and identify the data center market. Retail co-location, the example I like to use is when you go to the 7-Eleven and you go buy a Charms Blow Pop. You buy one off, you get one, and you pay a higher premium price for that retail experience. But you get more service when you go buy that product. That would be retail co-location. They're doing very small deals. They're offering very high levels of service to their clients. Wholesale, on the other hand, is simply what the word says. You're buying in bulk, and you're really managing more of the commitments yourself on your own staff. That's really fundamentally the difference. Enterprise, we needed to figure out a term when companies, large tech companies, primarily in our market, were going and either buying, building, or leasing 100% of a building. Those are enterprise offerings. They control the entire asset. They manage the asset, all the maintenance, ongoing. They're taking care of all of that. Sometimes they're even doing build-to-suits where the tech company will do the investment, all the CapEx of the infrastructure, the backup generation, the chillers, the cooling, the UP, all that infrastructure they're taking care of. Those will be enterprise deals. And then carrier hotels are locations with a high concentration of connectivity that have been aggregated together, that their end users are leveraging all those connection points. They were very, very popular, very, very important about 25 years ago, 20 years ago. There's been so much network that's been laid into the ground, not quite as important in today's world. I'm going to move through the utility slide, but I do want to put a little meat on the bone. This is a very, very rudimentary, simple Excel spreadsheet for you all to follow, to just elaborate why SVP is indeed so important when you look at a total cost of occupancy to run a data center business. So this example, what I chose to do was there's a local tech company that's leased, since 2016, they've leased 86 megawatts of data center capacity. It's a huge footprint. They've done 40 megawatts this year alone. They have actually 150 in their total portfolio, but let's just talk about their footprint since 2016. So the way you figure out a power bill is pretty straightforward. What's the power utilization? What are they using? In this case, it's 83,000 kilowatts. How many hours in a month? 730 hours in a month. What's the PUE, power utilization efficiency? How efficient is it when the power comes into the building and then actually gets delivered to the IT infrastructure? How efficient is it? There's an uplift charge that's part of that calculation. 1.25%. A load factor, what percentage of the utility are you using? 80 is a good rough number. Wendy, you said actually you see 50%. But we're just budgeting in this case that they're going to use 80% of that. Most importantly, what's the cost per kilowatt hour? We're using an example with SVP at 11.8 cents a kilowatt hour, and we're comparing and contrasting that to another site actually in San Jose, a mock site that we're drafting up at 13.8 cents. And these are pretty conservative numbers. We actually have a client. I have a client that I'm working with that has a data center in Santa Clara, SVP. They have a data center in San Jose, PG&E. So these are real numbers. So you just simply take 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5, and you get a monthly power bill. So with this footprint, this particular company is paying roughly $7.1 million a month for their utility bill to run that data center in Santa Clara. If you compare and contrast that same facility with the PG&E power bill, $8.3 million, so it's a $1.2 million per month delta. That really is the X factor. I would say 20 years ago when the business was really growing, kind of emerging itself, the densities of these data centers were much lower. The concern about the power bill wasn't quite as intense as it is today. There have been 10 new data center projects built in the last 3 years. All of them are in Santa Clara without exception. There's one exception, which is Equinix, who's got a retail business in South San Jose with PG&E. So that really is part of the secret sauce to Santa Clara. Can you imagine, I've got clients all the time that are coming in from around the world, East Coast, other parts of the country. Hey, we need to evaluate the market. Should we go lease a facility through Digital Realty? Should we go buy land and build it ourselves? Help us. Power is an integral piece of that. And part of the secret sauce that Santa Clara offers is that literally I can pick up the phone. And I didn't even know, Wendy, this is totally impromptu, but it's very, very true. I can pick up the phone, send a text to Wendy, and in the same day, I can have a client. We can be sitting at City Hall, meeting and discussing a plan, real time. So the city is so responsive. If you compare that to, outside of the area, really, it's daunting. It's scary. 5 minutes. Okay. I told you I could go forever on this thing. Lots of stories to tell. I'll tell one quick story. We had a client that was looking to build a data center outside of Santa Clara, and it took us literally 3 weeks to get a meeting with city officials. We got the meeting, and the first thing the city said to us was, we've got a bridge we need to build. And in order to get this land use approved, we need some help. And so I would say Santa Clara really embraces the community. It's just such a strong, powerful package. That's why you see the data center development there. I am going to move into one or two slides and we'll just wrap this up. This is an aerial of a data center and probably a really good one for us to wrap up the conversation on. This is an existing data center right off Central Expressway. If you all know Central Expressway, this is Walsh. Intel built that site in the 70s. 3 buildings. There's a 60,000 square foot building that was here that's original, and then a 180,000 square foot building that's been added onto. And then there used to be a 24,000 square foot building right here. It's a 17-acre site. We actually had a client that was looking when Intel decided to sell it, which was about 7-8 years ago. I had a client that was interested in buying it, so I got very familiar with the property. I remember touring through this building with the client. There's, again, that small 24,000 square footer. There were pictures of Andy Grove and Gordon Moore giving engineering presentations. There was a lot of really cool Silicon Valley history here. Well, what Intel decided to do is they built a substation on the property, a 50-megawatt substation, which we're highlighting SVP, and it's in orange up there. And then they built a test lab in the large building. It was a 5-megawatt, high-density, like 500-watt-a-foot lab that they were using. They decided it was, legacy real estate. They didn't want to own it anymore, and they sold it to a developer that came along. And it's just a great example of how the Silicon Valley keeps reinventing itself and innovating. And with this site, what this particular developer, Vantage Data Centers, they've taken on a Chinese money partner called Digital Bridge, and they have a $1 billion line of credit that they've been slowly investing in this site. It's about a 70-megawatt data center now that they've built. What I want to point out is their first phase was this, what they call V3. And they took an existing 60,000 square foot building, a typical, you've passed a bazillion of these buildings in the valley as you've driven around town. They took this very traditional building, seismically upgraded, retrofitted the walls, put a new roof on, and put all that infrastructure in, and they leased that building to Facebook. As Facebook was, exploding their business around 2008, 2009, that transaction occurred. Fast forward, they just completed construction on what they call V5. It's a 4-story, 210,000 square foot, 15-megawatt data center. And I think what it illustrates is, in the period of 8 years, the trend of we're having to pay, we're competing for land, we're paying more for land. So in order to justify paying that higher price for land, you've got to just build more building. That's really what's going on here, and that's what we'll continue to see in projects. So when you see a data center site, a couple of components. There's the power component. You will always see some type of power component. Substation, heavy transmission power to the site. You will see perimeter security, and you'll see network connectivity. Those are the key ingredients. I'm going to speed through this, and I just want to touch on what's going to be coming at you from a under construction and a planning standpoint. The green dots represent sites that are under construction today, data centers that are physically hammers are swinging, they're under construction. Of the 4 that are under construction, all but 2 have been pre-let by a large tech company. Large blocks of space have been taken down. There's about a 7% vacancy rate in the data center market today, locally. And so what we've seen is, in the last 18 months, we've seen a number of new logos come to the market that want to add supply to the market. And so that's the other thing to keep your eye on, would be these blue dots. These blue dots represent new sites that have been purchased by data center developers to bring supply to market, chasing all that demand. What they've done in the last 3 years is they've driven pricing, land pricing up significantly, though. So if you're a property owner, it's fantastic. It's been fantastic in the marketplace. And I'll give you one just kind of quick data point to think about. There's a company called DuPont Fabros that acquired this site, 535 Reed Street in Santa Clara. They bought a 15-acre site that a local developer, Barry Swenson, owned. They called it the Beaver Lumber Site. It was an old lumber site. Barry sold that to DuPont Fabros in 2007, thereabouts, just before the crash, for $29 a land foot, 15-acre site. Over time, DuPont executed flawlessly and successfully built a 36-megawatt data center and a separate second 15-megawatt data center, these 2 buildings. So that was in 2008. This past year, we've seen 5 mega land transactions. The most noteworthy is Cyrus One, which is a large data center group out of Texas. They bought the old graphics packaging site. It's a 15-acre site, and next door there's an Enterprise car rental. They bought that site for $80 a land foot. The last one I'll leave you with is that 2175 Martin Avenue, property number 5. It's an infrastructure private equity fund out of New York that just purchased that site in January this year for $145 a land foot. So again, because all of these factors we've talked to you all about, data centers have to really be in Santa Clara. It's really driving up values, and it's across all food groups, whether it's data center, whether it's industrial, whether it's office, whether it's residential. All of these folks are competing for a limited resource called land. They are driving up values. That's going to continue to happen. So the challenge for us, and I'll close on this note because I think we've got to wrap it up. We can always do a follow-up and have more dialogue here. But the challenge is going to be, how do we sustain our economy in a constrained market? I mean, it's all of our benefit to figure that problem out. We've got to figure it out. And so I think the way to do it is you've got to go dense, you've got to go vertical. You will see more of that in this market over time. So I'll just wrap things up and say a lot of fun chatting with you about the market. I hope you've taken a nugget or 2 away about the data center business, what's driving it, where is it going, and how is it impacting our community here locally. Very exciting times, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. Have a great holiday, and all the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. So let's give a hand to Jerry.